in our field, we become experts at discarding the irrelevant, if you will. We're looking for things in the subject house. We're looking for things in comps, but we're looking for things that are irrelevant so we can discard them. And then we can focus all our efforts on the things that are relevant to us. Well, in the world, quite often we carry that expertise out into the world, but we discard many of the things that could be relevant tips and clues to some impending event.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Welcome to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out in the podcast chair. Well, actually standing today. By the way, folks, if you don't have a standing desk, you need to get one. I'm telling you, it's a good investment. We've got a great show lined up for you today. I want to first pause and remind you that we are sponsored by three great companies. First of all, OREP Insurance. OREP is what I switched to, 3-4 years ago. Very, very happy I did. You would be too. Check them out. Go to orep.org. That's OREP.org. We, of course, are sponsored by Alamode Software. Alamode is the software that I use to do more. It allows me to be efficient as an appraiser. Check them out. Go to alamode.com or 800-ALAMODE. And finally, we are sponsored by DataMaster. DataMaster is rolling out DataMaster 6 across the country. And if you think you were saving time with the first DataMaster, wait till you see 6 and what it can do for you in analytics and support and everything else. Check them out. Go to datamasterusa.com. One more time, it's datamasterusa.com. Well, folks, I want to welcome back to the program Mr. Blaine Feyen. He has been on the program before. Blaine, before I get into an official intro, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me back. Really honored to be here again.
Well, it's always good to have you. Consider Blaine a friend. He started, of course, the Real Value Group in 2005 after running a sizable residential and commercial real estate appraisal firm. Before that, Blaine developed one of the most comprehensive appraiser training programs in the industry. And Blaine's appraiser training programs cover aspects of the appraisal profession typically not taught in your regular licensing courses and mentoring programs. He is currently the host, and this is where I found out about him, of the Real Value podcast, as well as other podcasts. And if you have not started listening to the Real Value podcast, folks, you're really missing out. It's great information, valuable information. Comes out, weekly, Blaine?
Yep, once a week.
Yeah, nice. And your reason for doing that, you've mentioned it on air, but mention it here. Why a podcast?
Well, primarily, I know a lot of people do blogging and whatnot for their clients or their market. And I had done that as well several years ago and started a podcast kind of to answer those questions. But I realized that there were a lot more appraisers who needed some of the information that I was providing to mastermind groups and doing some business coaching and things like that. So I decided to shift the focus of the podcast more for their benefit than, say, my market benefit. Nice.
Very cool. Well, you've got a great voice and great presence on the air, so I'm glad to welcome you back to the program. Last time I had you on, I think we just talked generally about the appraisal profession, where we see it going, what our histories have been, introduced everybody to your podcast, of course, and chat a little bit about that. Of course, you have a little bit of a background that's very unique when it comes to appraisers, and that's why I wanted to have you back on the program. I tell you, Blaine, I was telling you off the air, and I'll just share with the listeners here, I've been wanting to have this program for a very, very long time. And that is a program about safety, security, self-defense, just common sense when it comes to appraisal, because we as appraisers kind of get ourselves in some pretty, I would say, unique and maybe even go so far as to say precarious situations sometimes that maybe our safety is, I don't know about at risk, but something we need to maybe be a little bit more cognizant of, maybe not concerned about, but cognizant of. And tell me a little bit about your background, Blaine, as far as self-defense goes.
Yeah, well, if anybody heard our discussion when I was first on, of course, they know my martial arts background, or if they listen to my podcast, I talk often and kind of bring experiences from my martial arts background. But I've been doing and teaching Aikido for almost 30 years now. which alone, I need to say, does not qualify me to teach or talk about self-defense. In fact, martial arts instructors are probably the worst people to teach self-defense for something. Yeah, it's called the paradox of self-defense. The more you train in something, the less you're likely to need it or use it.
Interesting.
Either because your awareness expands, or because you're carrying yourself differently. But also, typically people who are attracted to the martial arts and get into the martial arts, they do so because they've been bullied, they weren't good at sports, or they're trying to build their confidence or discipline or something like that. And they just never get into scenarios. There's this myth that martial arts instructors or teachers are the greatest at teaching them. But many martial arts teachers do just what many appraisers do when it comes to making adjustments to comps, is they just do what they've been taught, and it's been handed down from teacher to teacher to teacher. They teach what they know, kicking, punching, and whatever. Where I really got my defensive tactics chops, I guess you will, is working my family business, which I've also talked about in the podcast, which is, I refer to it colloquially as the ghetto grocery store. It was in
store,
yeah, it was in probably the most depressed area of our town, and probably what would be considered one of the most dangerous parts of town. Our clientele, our customer demographic, were typically the people who were going to be committing the crimes and taking violent actions against people. So we had to learn 3 skills very quickly. We had to learn awareness first and foremost, which is a lot of what I teach in defensive tactics. We had to learn communication, and we had to learn basically how to deliver our intent quite quickly. And have a plan. I guess have a plan would be the big number 3.
Okay.
You learned very quickly. Every person that came in every situation, you better be able to communicate with a wide variety of people. You better be super aware of what's going on at all times, where their hands are, where their movements are, what their intentions are, what their eyes are saying, and then have a plan to get out of it very quickly.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Very interesting. And I want to back up for just a second, because you said something about martial arts instructors and maybe even students, or maybe the least individuals that would have to use that. What people are not seeing on the screen, because this is audio, obviously, but I'm looking at you, Blaine. You're a big ass guy, dude. I wouldn't mess with you at all. And that's really what it is. That's really what it is. Okay. Yeah. So let's dive into this, and let me set this up. Really what I'm looking for, Blaine, here today is, we as appraisers on a pretty regular basis fall into situations that I want to talk specifically about, but maybe begin by talking in general about the number one thing that you talked about, awareness. And I want to get into, appraising vacant properties, and I want to talk about comp pictures and different things where you and I have both heard the stories. Many of us have actually been involved in situations that, maybe didn't turn into an altercation, but could have very easily, situations that I felt like my danger was at stake. I know you've talked a little bit about this on your program as well, but let's just talk in general first of all. What as an appraiser, we're going into vacant houses, we're going to neighborhoods that we don't frequent on a regular basis. We're taking comp pictures, we're doing things that to the outside world could look suspicious. Yeah. Let's talk about awareness first of all.
Okay. Well, one of the things, and anytime I teach a defensive tactics course, whether it's women's self-defense or I'm teaching to law enforcement, military people, the vast majority of the course is all about awareness, awareness tips and tricks, exercises. We get into meditation and opening up your awareness, expanding your awareness and your peripheral vision and all these things, because everything that occurs twice, meaning if an action is going to be taken, it occurs first in the mind, whether that's the mind of the criminal or the mind of the person who has to defend themselves. Right. And then it occurs again in the real world when the action is taken. And all of those things leave clues. So awareness ties in very, very closely with something we call pre-incident indicators. And that means just opening your awareness to all those clues that are left, that something untoward or nefarious or evil or violent or whatever may be occurring. And if you boil everything down to awareness first, you will find that you rarely, if ever, have to defend yourself physically. So, and the thing that happens with appraisers specifically is we become experts in our field. We become experts at discarding the irrelevant, if you will. We're looking for things in the subject house. We're looking for things in comps, but we're looking for things that are irrelevant so we can discard them, and then we can focus all our efforts on the things that are relevant to us. Well, in the world, quite often, we carry that expertise out into the world, but we discard many of the things that could be relevant tips and clues to some impending event. Okay. And so experts tend to filter out what the novice takes in. which is all of the information.
Gotcha. I think I understand what you're saying. In other words, we as appraisers, we get focused on the things that we're expert at focusing on. In other words, what the novice would possibly not see, let's say, the chipping, peeling paint on the side of the house, we as the appraiser pick up on right away. We see that before we even see the paint color. But what you're saying is sometimes we get so focused on those things that we forget that there's all this going out here, on the peripheral that we should be aware of as well, right?
That's right. We discard what we consider to be the irrelevant. And when we're talking about defensive tactics or self-defense and awareness, the irrelevant is usually the very thing we should have noticed. And in fact, when the police are taking the report after a violent action, something bad has happened, it's usually that irrelevant event that comes back to become one of the most relevant things. In fact, victims quite often say, you know what, I noticed that car in the driveway, but I discarded it. I didn't think anything of it.
Yeah. So, hindsight's 2020. Okay. So let's get into some specifics then, Blaine, if you don't mind. Let's first talk about, and we hear these stories all the time. In fact, usually those stories, I do a series on this podcast. You've probably heard it, Blaine, called Appraiser Stories, where I just interview appraisers and just talk about, maybe some funny things that have happened to them. And sometimes they talk about some scary things that have happened to them. And it usually starts out like this. I was appraising an REO vacant property. Fill in the blank, right? So let's talk about vacant properties. So what should an appraiser be thinking about in terms of safety when they walk up to a vacant home, even if they have permission to enter?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm just going to be saying this over and over and over. It's awareness, and it's not just the house. Again, the expert discounts what they consider to be the irrelevant, but everything in a neighborhood is relevant. Obviously, not only for appraising, but from an awareness and a defensive tactics standpoint, be aware of everything. It may be a vacant house, but it may not actually be vacant at the time you go there.
Good point.
So noticing everything, noticing vehicles that are out in front, parked in the street, noticing vehicles if they're in the driveway. But what I also recommend people do is their awareness is heightened. They move it from level 5 to level 10 or 11. And as they're walking around the exterior of the house, they're looking in windows. They're looking to sense movement. If it's a 2-story house, you're looking at the upper windows, which maybe we might not tend to do unless we're trying to look at the roof or the gutters or whatever.
Okay.
You're actually looking to scan and see if there's movement up there. Police officers all the time, when they walk by a vehicle, they always test. You might have never noticed this, but they always test the trunk. They train police officers as well. They always put their hand on the trunk to see if the trunk is loose or open. Because that's a potential sign of danger, that if they walk past that and they go to the driver's side, the trunk could pop open. People have been in the trunks and have killed police officers.
Oh, interesting. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, you'll see it now if you watch cops. Anytime they approach a vehicle from the rear, they always test the trunk latch and door first. But appraisers can do the same thing. We can test doors. If a door is unlocked or open, or there's some signs of forced entry, sometimes you can see screwdriver marks by the door casing. All these could be indicators. Just something to pique your awareness, a pre-incident indicator to be very aware when you go into the house.
Okay.
Broken windows, obviously, broken basement windows and things like that. So first and foremost is just being aware of the exterior of the structure, being aware of neighbors sitting on porches watching, being aware of those kind of things. And then once we get into the house, we've done our exterior stuff.
Let me pause you for just a second, because let's go back. We're still on the outside of the house. I've heard of appraisers. Again, it's a vacant house. You verified it's vacant. You know it's vacant. It's got a lockbox. I know appraisers will start measuring the outside, but I guess I would suggest you knock anyway, right? Or no?
Well, yeah. I mean, some of us have a normal process of going to the house, notifying the homeowner we're there, and then doing our exterior stuff. But yeah, absolutely. If somebody is inside and they have some nefarious intent, of course, you could stir movement. So yeah, knocking on the house first to see if somebody comes and answers would be one of those common sense things you mentioned at the beginning.
Right.
That certainly could be the one thing. Maybe that wouldn't save you, but that could tip you off that all is not as you thought.
Right.
And maybe they had no nefarious intent, but somebody comes to the door and you go, oh, I thought it was vacant.
Well, and I'll even go one step further. I have on occasion, it doesn't happen very often, but remember, I work a very rural area. Sometimes there's numbers, sometimes there isn't. I have been in situations where I have knocked on the wrong house. Usually that is cleared up right away. But if it's a quote unquote vacant house and I've got the wrong house and I start measuring the outside without knocking, boy, that puts me in if I'm a homeowner and I see this guy creeping around the outside of my house that hasn't knocked on the door, it puts me in a pretty precarious situation.
Yeah, sadly, I do have to admit that I have measured a whole house before an extensive measurement, only to find out at the end as I approach the door that it's the wrong house.
Oh,
And
I
I'm
got
sure
paid. I got paid back when we
Did
did
you?
CODs. Oh yeah, the lady wrote me out a check. I walked out into my car, and then as I was writing down the check number on the invoice, I realized that the addresses didn't match. I went back to the house, knocked on it. I said, "You need to be careful who you give money to." Oh, I just thought my husband had set this up. I was just crazy.
That's a good appraiser story there. Yeah.
Right. So knock on the door, even if you think it's vacant. Make sure it's actually vacant.
Absolutely. And then, of course, once we enter, now I know one of the questions is, do you lock the door behind you?
Yeah.
I do, as a general rule, recommend that people lock the door behind them. However, before we even get to that point, as we're walking around the exterior of the house and then on the interior, and by the way, all of these things should become stuff that people practice.
Okay.
It sounds a little weird at first, and like anything new, it becomes an odd practice. But once you start to practice it, awareness becomes the rule of the day everywhere and always. And of course, it has success benefits because you then become aware of potential opportunities. And when you start listening to your intuition, sometimes your intuition will save you from deals that could have been the worst deal of your life. But knowing all of your escape routes, even when you're walking around the exterior, knowing how far you are from your vehicle, are you going to run to your vehicle if you're trapped in the backyard? Are you going to run across or jump across the back fence? Knowing your escape routes. And then I would say the same thing once you go into the house. So once you enter a vacant house, well, any house really, but specifically we're talking about vacant. Once you enter a vacant house, you've already walked around the exterior and you should have made a mental note of where all of your escape routes are once you're inside, meaning side doors and rear doors.
Okay.
Now, you don't know if those doors are barred from the inside. You don't know the locking system. You don't know if it has a deadbolt, if it's got some crazy chain lock or what it might have. But you should know those things once you enter the house. But I recommend once people enter, they just sit and wait for 10 to 30 seconds. And you're listening and feeling for any movement.
Okay.
You're listening to the upstairs. You're listening for the rest of the house just to see if you can hear or pick up anything. Some people will announce appraiser. That's fine if you want to try to trigger some movement, but just sit and listen. Again, this comes back to intuition. Most people's intuition is far better at figuring things out than your brain or your computer or your cell phone ever could.
Yep.
You just have to learn to trust it. Give yourself 30 seconds to just listen for movement.
Okay, two stories.
Then lock the door. Yeah. Go ahead.
The reason I asked you the question about locking the door is I used to not. I used to do vacant houses, and I would just. In fact, I would leave usually unless it was cold outside, I would leave the door ajar, and I would do my thing and then go back out. On two occasions, I had someone enter the home after me. Now, on both occasions, it turned out to be a nosy neighbor. Hey, what are you doing here? I shouldn't say nosy. An aware neighbor. Okay, a concerned neighbor. But they entered the house after me. And here I am in a vacant house with someone I don't know. And I felt uncomfortable. I thought, maybe I need to start locking the door. That being said, Blaine, I've heard stories from some of my appraiser friends who have said that they have found squatters inside vacant homes. And if they had locked the door behind them, that's just one more barrier for them to get out if they need to. So that I was serious when I said, do you lock the door or not lock the door? Because it could go either way.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. And that is my follow-up to that is, although my general rule is to lock the door behind you, just know you've just locked yourself into the home. In fact, whether it's a vehicle or a home, most attacks occur right by the egress because somebody's fumbling with the lock when they're attacked or trying to get out. And of course, your fine motor skills go out the window once the adrenaline occurs. So
absolutely. Okay.
So knowing.
Let's talk about the nosy neighbor. We've all had this situation where we've gone up to the vacant house, or maybe it's an occupied house. We've knocked, we've announced ourselves, we start measuring on the outside, and then we see that neighbor next door who is just watching you like, what are you doing at my neighbor's house? What do you do in a situation that ignore? Do you walk up to them and say, hey, just thought I'd introduce myself? I mean, what do you do in a situation where you notice that the neighbor is definitely watching what you're doing?
Yeah, I wouldn't do either of those two things. I wouldn't ignore, but I wouldn't necessarily introduce myself. I wouldn't ignore because ignoring is suspicious behavior.
Gotcha.
Of course, we don't want to. I would always recommend in any situation, act as if you belong there.
Right.
So typically what I will do is I will wave and say hello. I don't introduce myself because then usually questions will be, oh, what are you doing there? And I don't want to reveal private information.
Confidential, sure.
I will always act as if I belong there. I walk with confidence. I wave to them. I let them know I'm not there to do anything bad. Of course, they don't always know. I too have an appraiser story where I did lock myself into the vacant house, and somebody was trying to get in, it was the nosy neighbor, but I think they had more nefarious intents. I could see them from the upper window because I could hear the door being jiggled. I saw them watching me from their porch, which is why I locked the door. Nothing ever happened. I waited in the house until they walked away before I exited.
Right.
But those are potential scenarios where that could occur. So just acting as if you belong there, I think, is a big deterrent.
Okay, and let's go one step further. Let's say you wave, you smile, you continue doing the measurement. They walk over. They approach you. You know, at that point, do you introduce yourself? Give them a business card? Now that they've actually approached you, maybe they're on the same property as you. Do things change at that point?
Yeah, they do, because when we talk about defensive tactics or self-defense, we always talk about distance zones where you have your public space, you have your personal space, and then you have your private space. So when a nosy neighbor is in their own space, they're in the public space. So waving to them, making them believe you belong, that's the normal etiquette to do something like that. Once they enter into your personal space, which is 7 to 12 feet, or worse, private space, which is in your 3-foot circle, now you're in. Basically, you've gone from level yellow to level orange and maybe to level red, where your awareness has to be peaked. And you change your strategy and your etiquette, which is, yes, you probably have to introduce yourself, maybe give a card. Because like you said, they don't all have nefarious intent. They could just be a nosy neighbor.
Sure. Okay.
And letting them know what's going on is always a good thing. It's always a good form of self-defense as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of these things can de-escalate very quick. As you said,
Absolutely.
hindsight's 2020. When you look at an incident, if you had just done this, if you just said this, if you just, not acted weird, things could have gone much, much, much differently. So
yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So all right, let's go back. We're talking about a vacant house. You've knocked. You've done your thing. You've measured around the outside. You've looked at all the exits. You've gone inside. And there's somebody there. You hear somebody, you see somebody. What next?
Yeah, time to leave. That's a pretty easy one. If you find somebody living in a property that is supposed to be vacant, it's no longer just a vacant house that you're appraising. It's a crime scene. So it's as opposed to making it a bigger and worse crime scene that has you involved. There's no appraisal worth putting yourself in that kind of danger. And again,
but it's a $600 VA, man.
Yeah, time to leave. You'll be back, but you'll just be back with the realtor or 2 or 3 other people or the police or whatever.
Or the police, yeah.
Yeah, but there's no strategy beyond escape and egress for that type of scenario, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah, I agree. I'm embarrassed to tell you this story, but I'm going to tell you anyway. This was when I was very young and very stupid. But I went to a property. I remember in Wyoming one day. It was a townhouse and lots of other homes around it and what have you. It was vacant. I was told it was vacant. I did my thing. I knocked. I announced myself. I measured around the outside, and then I unlocked the lockbox and came in again. Appraiser, anybody home? I started hearing something inside the house. Now, hindsight, I should have left. I should have left. Of course, I would have been laughed at later, because wait till the punchline here. But I kept listening. I thought, what is that? And it sounded like somebody was walking around. I kept saying, appraiser, anyone home? I'm here to do the inspection. A real estate appraiser, anybody home? I kept yelling and nobody's yelling back. And I'm like, this is really weird. Why isn't this guy? Because I was sure someone was walking around upstairs. Well, rather than leave like I should have done, I tiptoed up the stairs, keeping myself aware of what's going on, thinking this guy's going to jump out. The boogeyman's there. I know he is. Well, turned out that a bird had flown in the window and had been stuck in there and could not get out. Anyway, long story short, I had some gloves in the car. I ended up catching the bird and setting it free. But it could have turned out much differently if it had not been a bird.
Well, absolutely. And of course, we're taking into consideration both genders and not to do anybody injustice. But of course, sadly, we have to say that it is probably a much more dangerous situation for a female appraiser than maybe a male, only because an attacker or a situation like that could very well be more intent on attacking a female than a male. Forget strength differences and things like that. Just the deterrent factor of being a male gives us a leg up in defensive tactics situations over most violent scenarios. Okay, so if they have no intent to rob, if the intent is to rape and or murder, unfortunately, females fall into what's called the victim profile, much more nicely than males do.
Well, and we've all heard the stories. I've yet to hear one about an appraiser specifically yet, but we've all heard, and probably just because of the numbers, but we've all heard about the real estate agent, the female real estate agent that was lured into a vacant house showing and ended up in trouble. So I think we just need to be aware, folks. All right, let's go one step further. Let's say that someone does approach, and let's say they make it pretty clear that they are hostile. Maybe they're protecting their neighbor's property. Maybe they have nefarious intent. Maybe they see Blaine's brand new BMW sitting out front and they want to take it or what have you. I'm kidding about the BMW. I don't know whether you have one or not, but I figure someone as cool as you does. But let's say someone does approach you and is let's where do you go from there? They're hostile. What do you do?
Yeah, well, we without getting into a semantics issue, what's hostile for you may not be hostile for me. So we have to kind of narrow down what we might determine to be hostile. But I guess just taking it generally on its face, the term, meaning you have determined based on their tone, their body movements and their intent and maybe the volume of their voice, that they are hostile. Again, in my opinion, there is no appraisal worth facing somebody down. And understand that when it comes to defensive tactics, pre-incident indicators, and awareness, all good, true self-defense occurs long before it turns into a physical altercation.
Right.
So almost everything we deal with has to be heavily focused and weighted on noticing the pre-incident indicators, figuring out what's the unusual and the usual, the irrelevant and the relevant, and not letting somebody enter into your personal space. And usually, unfortunately, again, when it comes down to the record of violent altercations, whether it was rape, murder, robbery, or somebody just being physically assaulted, usually the report that the police end up taking is the person had an inkling that something was about to go down, but they were embarrassed. They were embarrassed to say something to the other person for fear of looking small or weak or something like that. They knew they should have maybe retreated back to their vehicle and just left, put their hands up and said, okay, yep, no problem. I'm happy to take off. But I would say, again, don't override your common sense and your intuition. There's no appraisal worth getting into a physical altercation over unless you're fighting for your life to egress the property, to get out of the property.
Yeah.
Hostile, anything hostile inside the vehicle, outside the vehicle, inside the house, outside the house is a red flag to leave.
Yep. Okay, good. I think this is good information. Let's shift gears slightly before we go to a break and talk about, we've been talking about vacant houses and some of the things that we might encounter. I've had some pretty scary situations, Blaine, in an occupied home with a homeowner. Any tips that you would give us for being in a home? Again, we're on their turf, we're on their private property, but yet it's a unique situation in our occupation. We are inside their home.
Yeah, and fortunately or unfortunately, the rules are the same. These are actually more dangerous situations just simply by definition, because now you know there's a person there. Although you don't know their backstory, you don't know their upbringing, you don't know if this is potentially a divorce, refinance, or whatever it might be.
Yep.
You don't know the mental state.
Speaking of which, that's one of the situations I ran into where I was hired to do a divorce situation, and the husband didn't know until he came home and found me there. So yeah. Yeah, and again, awareness and pre-incident indicators. It is one of our questions on our list of questions in divorce appraisal scenarios. Is this hostile? Which party is going to be there? Okay.
And
good.
We just try to suss some of that stuff out first. But
very wise.
Rules are the same. It's awareness.
Okay.
Trusting your intuition when it comes to their tone, their body language, looking at their eyes. This goes a little bit extensive that I teach to law enforcement, but you can assess pretty quickly if somebody's right-handed or left-handed based on their belt loops and things like this. But just learning to be aware of the whole feeling when you walk into a house, because when you know it's occupied now knowing where your escape routes are is that much more important. Now, what I will say too is tips and tricks. Always have your cell phone with you. Now, I know some appraisers use their cell phone to do their inspections.
Sure.
That's fine. But your cell phone could be your lifeline and link to safety should you come under attack. And I recommend that whether you have iPhone or you have an Android, you always enable the emergency settings. So in particular on my phone, I have the Galaxy Note 8 and the Note 9, all the Note lines, I think all of the Galaxy lines. You can activate the emergency setting, and if you press on the home button 3 times quickly, it will instantly take a snapshot of wherever you are, and it will send it to whoever you've determined to be your emergency contacts.
Oh, interesting.
It will also send the GPS setting of where you are.
Yeah.
And it will let them know I am in trouble. And I think iPhone has maybe something similar, not quite as extensive.
Okay.
But you have to be able to operate. You have to be able to flip that sucker open and either turn on the video camera. You could be getting the last pictures of your attacker, and or be able to call 911 quickly. Not in replacement of everything. It's while you're moving to.
You're still getting out of there. Right. Hey, could you hold on just a second while I call 911, sir?
Yeah, but I know a lot of appraisers who don't use their cell phones to do inspections, and they leave their phone in the car. Yeah. And I always recommend, occupied or unoccupied, you take your phone in with you.
Keep it with you. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you one question. You don't need to reveal what you do personally as far as a business decision on your side, but I do know some appraisers who will, if it's just inconvenient for the homeowner to be there, this is an occupied home, meaning people are actively living there, but for whatever reason, they can't make it back. So they say, hey, I'll leave it unlocked between 2 and 4. Go ahead and do your appraisal and then leave it locked behind you. I know other appraisers say, absolutely not. I would never go in a home that is occupied if someone is not there. I've even heard appraisers say, I would never go in any residence, occupied or vacant, unless I had another adult with me, another professional with me. What are your recommendations specifically for occupied homes, but nobody's going to be home?
Yeah, I have no problem revealing what we do here. I'm a big fan of not being held to somebody else's schedule. So if somebody says, we're not going to be there, but can you walk through, can we leave the door open or leave a key for you? We always say yes. Okay. I'm fine with that. Okay. But I'm also a very aware person, and I don't worry about my personal self-defense. So that's not a huge issue for me. Sure. But we do teach our appraisers, female and male, all of these safety precautions and knowing your escape routes and carrying your phone with you and all those things. But
and I've been in situations where I had permission. I've been in homes that are quote unquote occupied, but not at the time. And I've had people come home, and whether or not they were aware that I should have been there or not been there, but the first thing I do, no matter where I'm at in the house, I can usually hear them, come into the driveway, open up the garage door, what have you. I'm already hollering, I'm the appraiser, I'm in the house, Absolutely. I'm the appraiser, make sure they understand. I don't want an altercation of someone being surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had that as well many times, actually. And those can be scary because you don't know how they're going to take it. And I've had it before too, where somebody was home and I was walking through and they said hi to me and they got out of my way. And I went down to a lower basement bedroom. They didn't notify me anybody was in the basement.
Oh yeah.
It was a grown man sleeping, and he got up and grabbed a shotgun. And
oh my!
I hightailed it out, and I notified the lender and the realtor, and they apologized profusely for it. They notified the homeowner, and they asked if I'd go back. I said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Call a new appraiser.
Okay. All right.
So they can happen.
Okay, good. I'm going to give you we're going to go to a break and I want to talk about comp photos, but I'm going to give you a heads up, Blaine, so you can be thinking about this during the break. But I didn't ask you in the preliminary questions, but I do want to chat with you a little bit about finding illegal activity on a property and sure. what you would do in that situation. We're talking with Blaine Feyen. He is the host of the Real Value podcast, and we're talking about safety and security and self-defense even, if it comes to that, as an appraiser, and making sure mostly that we are aware, diffuse situations before they become a situation. I want to pause here and, of course, remind you that we are sponsored by OREP Insurance. Folks, I want to tell you about 3-4 years ago, I switched to OREP Insurance. And yes, I switched because they wanted to become a sponsor of my program. That was the only reason I switched. And I said, you know what? I'll try them out. No big deal. Folks, it was a big deal on the positive side. It was very easy. They reduced what I was paying currently with my current E&O insurer. Every single year, without exception, when I've renewed, my fees have dropped, and they've been able to find very, very good coverage for me. Folks, they will do the same for you. Check them out. Go to orep.org. That's OREP.org. We are sponsored, of course, by DataMaster. I've had an opportunity over the last couple of weeks to see DataMaster 6 in action. Folks, if you have not seen the demo of DataMaster 6, I tell you, you will be blown away. You can basically do everything you need to do with a comparable before you even input it into whatever software you're using. It is absolutely incredible. The analysis that it allows you to do will blow you away. It is a new system, and the old system will save you 30 to 60 minutes per report. Think of what the new DataMaster 6 can do for you. If you're not already a client of DataMaster, check them out. Go to datamasterusa.com. Again, it's DataMaster, and then you got to add USA.com. Finally, we are sponsored by Alamode. Alamode, of course, is the software that I've been using for over 20 years. Well, why? There's a lot of choices out there, folks, and there's more choices being put on the market every day. Why do I stick with Alamode? Well, I'll tell you. Alamode is there for me. Alamode has allowed me to be able to use tools and ideas and processes much, much more efficiently than I can with other software. There's some great software out there, folks, but I'll tell you, nothing holds a candle to Alamode. Alamode has been with me, like I say, for over 20 years. They've been with appraisers for over 30 years, helping them to be able to do more with less. Check them out. Go to alamode.com. Again, it's Alamode, ALAMODE.com, or you can call them at 800-ALAMODE. All right, folks, we are back. We're talking with Blaine Feyen. He is the host of the Real Value podcast. He's also had quite an extensive history, if you will, of learning self-defense tactics and the martial arts, if you will. Blaine, welcome back to the program. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Before
we jump into comp photos, I teased something a little bit before the break, and that was I know appraisers run into, and I have had experiences here where, some states will allow pot, some don't. I think there's more and more allowing that, but not just talking about marijuana or illegal plants, if you will, but what about some other situations where an appraiser, during an inspection, whether the person's there or not, we run into a situation where we recognize, observe illegal activity going on. What would be your tips and tricks in that kind of a situation?
Well, I guess I'd have to ask a few more questions.
Sure.
Are you referring to the cannabis thing, or would it be something else?
I would say that and maybe something else. I mean, looking back on it, I think that I'm pretty sure, unless I really thought about it, I think that's probably the only thing that I've personally run into that I would call illegal activity. But you could run into a situation where you think there might be abuse going on. There might be a dogfighting ring going on, or anything that you might run into. You think, okay, there's some suspicious things going on here. What is our responsibility with confidentiality, with just the welfare of the people in the neighborhood and in the home itself? I guess probably, and the reason for your question obviously is it probably depends on the situation. But are there any tips or tricks in general you would say? What is an appraiser's responsibility in that situation?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if I can act. I might ask you the same thing to get your input on it, but I don't know what an appraiser's responsibility per se. I can tell you what I think a good citizen's responsibility is.
Okay.
I have never, and I have been in homes. By the way, Michigan just added themselves to the list of legal states for cannabis, so that's not an issue here now. But I have been in homes where there were grow operations where they didn't have the certificate on the door, and they, you could tell it was not a legal operation. The only people I have ever notified is the lender.
Okay.
And of course, the lender canceled the deal. They couldn't do it. And but I never took any steps to call police because that kind of thing didn't ever bother me.
Right. Okay.
Judgments aside, I don't really care that much about that particular issue. However, which is why I asked you the question, if I saw something that I knew, and by the way, again, working with police and doing a lot of ride-alongs with law enforcement, seeing a lot of stuff, many times I wish I hadn't. If I could identify abuse in a home, if I could identify smuggling ring, trafficking, people, children, whatever, porn operations, whatever they may be. Yes, I think as a citizen, which I fortunately never come across, but I think it is our duty to go to the next step. And even if it's anonymously, notify somebody for sure.
Yeah. Well, as you're talking, and hopefully I'm not revealing too much here, but as you're talking, an experience came to mind. It actually wasn't that long ago. I can't even believe I didn't even think about it as we were chatting here. But I was in a multifamily property. Well, we'll just say within the last year, and we ran into a situation where I felt like there was some. In fact, it was not just myself; it was me and a trainee that were there, walking through the property, and both of us, when we got out, said that was really weird, and it caused enough red flags that maybe we need to say something, and we did. We called the lender, let them know, and then we also called authorities as well. And this was not a cannabis situation. This was a situation where I felt like there was some physical abuse going on with some minors, and so no, I appreciate that. That's good feedback, Blaine. All right, let's talk comp photos. I think that's probably what comes to most people's mind when we talk about safety and security, because we've all had those situations. We've been chased down. We've had cops called on us. If you've been in this business more than just a few years, you've had a situation where you were out taking comp photos and it didn't go well. And I don't want to talk about the pros and cons of whether we should be taking comp pictures or not. Everybody has their own opinions on that. Everybody knows where I stand on it. But let's just talk about best practices when doing it, when out taking comp photos. There's a situation where sometimes appraisers will say, I'm not even going to go into that neighborhood. Certain neighborhoods altogether, I'm just going to avoid. Let's start there. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, certainly a judgment call, because we're probably on the same page as far as the usefulness of it or right or wrong of it. But if somebody for whatever reason determines that they're just not going to put themselves in that particular situation or scenario, to me that's a sign of awareness.
Yeah,
and great. Just put the language in the report, and you're all set.
Okay, yeah.
I'm okay with that. Okay. I've never personally avoided a neighborhood, but that's because I'm me. But we have all encountered those similar scenarios as a result.
Yeah, that's because Blaine's a bad A. I'm telling you.
I just don't worry about it.
I'm seeing it on the screen here. Okay, so we've all had this situation where let's just switch it around. Let's do a 180. You're not an appraiser. You're in your home. You're sitting at the window doing dishes or what have you. Your kids are out playing in the yard, and car slows down, window rolls down. Camera comes up, click, and off they drive. I mean, that's that. I'm sorry. I'm an appraiser. I understand what they're probably doing, but that freaks the hell out of me.
Strange.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Yeah,
it's very strange. And it's been one of our arguments for years for not having to do it.
Yeah. And on one hand, we as appraisers complain, I got chased down the road by some, parent that was concerned about, I wasn't taking a picture of their kids. I was just taking a picture of their house and blah, 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 blah. I'll tell you, as a parent, I can completely see their side. So my question to you, Blaine, is best practices for taking comp photos to avoid situations that might concern neighbors.
Yeah. The only thing, there's only a few, because obviously we're limited, and either you do it or you don't take the comp photos. So we're limited in terms of minimalizing the impact or the effect or the view that somebody might have on us. And one of those ways, I think probably the best way, and I've seen some appraisers, I don't personally do this, but where they have the magnetic sign made and put on the side of their car that identifies them as an appraiser. What I also recommend for people who don't want to go that step is printing up on 8.5 by 14, a nice big piece of paper with a nice seal and certificate that states appraiser taking comparable sale photos. Somebody sees that in the back, the rear passenger windows of both sides of the vehicle. They may then just write it off and go, oh, it looks like an official vehicle. Even if they can't read it, if it looks like an official vehicle, again, using the attitude that you belong there, waving to somebody. But of course, the next level is somebody inquiring or asking you what you're doing.
Yeah, let's go there. In fact, before we do, though, I just want to say one thing about the magnetic signs or the pictures in the window. I am very good friends. In fact, I would call him my best friend next to my wife. Very, very good friends with an individual that locally owns an insurance company. They do a lot of auto insurance, and I've had a discussion with him on numerous occasions about this. And he said it depends on the carrier, but some carriers will deny you if you get in a wreck and you have signs on the side of your car and you have not declared your vehicle a business vehicle. A lot of times they will deny the claim because you were out, with your personally insured vehicle doing business, and you should have had it insured commercially. So if you have the signs, you may want to check with your insurance company. Just FYI,
great tip. I've heard that as well.
You're covered. So okay, so let's run into the situation now. We've taken the picture. Let me give you a couple different scenarios. Okay, let's start with this. You've taken the picture. You're starting to drive off, and you notice the front door come open and somebody fly out of the house and very rapidly coming toward you. Do you stop and talk to them? Do you take off very quickly? I mean, what do you do, Blaine?
Yeah, I don't recommend stopping and talking.
Really? Okay.
Because we're talking about the circles of self-defense, and you go from public space to private or personal space, and then private space. Once somebody gets to your vehicle, you've just limited your options. So the escalation has begun. And it could all end with good communication. Hey, I'm sorry to scare you, but I'm an appraiser and I'm taking comp photo. They may not understand that. So it may not be good enough for somebody. And they want to now detain you and then the fight starts. So I would much rather have somebody take down my license number, call the police, and have a conversation with the local sheriff on what I was doing there than I would be stuck in a situation in the middle of a street with an angry homeowner.
Okay. So even if 9 times out of 10, you sitting there and just saying, hey, listen, I'm an appraiser. I'm taking a picture of your house because you bought it in the last year. We're using it for, but you try to do all the whole explanation. That 1 time in 10 that they wouldn't listen to you, but they become hostile is worth driving off every time.
It's the same thing with a vacant house, right? 99 out of 100, they're going to be fine. It's that 1 out of 100 that you didn't lock the door and the neighbor walks in and now you're scared. So it's always that one time that we build our self-defense or our awareness around. Most of us are going to make it our whole lives and never have to use any kind of awareness or self-defense. Right? We can just stumble through and be fine and miss all of the open manhole covers and things like that just out of sheer luck. But it's that one time.
Okay. All right. So I think I know the answer to this because I listened to one of your episodes about where you answered a question or a comment that someone had made about, surrounding the car. But I have had a situation where no, they did not surround the car. It was one individual. It was female. If that makes a difference, whatever. I'm just going to throw it out there. But it was a situation where I drove down a cul-de-sac. There was one way out. I turned around. I took the picture first, which was probably stupid. I probably should have taken it in the past. I took it first because I was facing the house, right? Yeah. And what I probably should have done is rolled down the passenger window and taken the picture and then immediately driven off, which I guess is kind of a side note here. I try to take the picture as I'm moving and kind of hit the gas afterwards. It almost sounds like I'm trying to be elusive, but frankly, I'm just trying to avoid a confrontation that I've had happen when you slow down, take the picture, and then wait while you're writing down the address and everything else. And next thing you know, somebody's standing at your window, knocking at the window saying, what the hell are you doing? But I did have a situation, back to my story, Blaine. I'm driving down, I take the picture out the driver's window. I flip the UE in the cul-de-sac. And as I'm coming out, the lady, I could see her coming from her door, running out. She jumps in front of my car, and you got to understand that this was a narrow street with cars on either side. It wasn't like I could have just gunned it. Frankly, if I had gunned it, I would have run her over. Now, that to me was not an option. Now, if she had a gun pointed at me, maybe something different. She did not. Some would say, well, just, if they're going to sit in front of the car, you have every right to run them over. I'm sorry, I was not brave enough to do that. Maybe it was because she was female. Maybe it was because I thought, I can talk my way out of this. And I did. It was one of those 9 times out of 10 that after I explained what I was doing and what have you, she was very angry at first, but she calmed down. What do you do when somebody throws themselves in front of your car like that?
Yeah, well, you've thrown a real monkey wrench into the works here because this was a female. I got lots of advice for when it's a male. It does change a little bit. No,
it did for me. I mean, maybe I'm sexist, but it did for me.
No, you're testing me a little bit, but you don't have the right to. The law of proportionality says that your self-defense can be equal to, but not greater than the level of force that's being applied to you. So you don't have the right to run somebody over. A vehicle is a deadly weapon. And if somebody's standing in front of it, you cannot articulate to a jury of your peers that you felt your life was in danger. That's a big no-no. It's if they maybe start beating on your car, they climb on the hood of your car, they start stomping on the roof of your car. Now you can speed off. Those kind of things might play into the law of proportionality where you felt for your life. But in this instance, where it's a female, and where I don't suspect you felt that your life was in danger, but it's obviously a potentially hostile scenario. This sounds common sense and simple, but please always make sure all your vehicle doors are locked. All of our newer vehicles, they lock once you hit 50 miles an hour or whatever it is. You don't worry about it and you don't think about it. Again, discarding the irrelevant for the relevant. Just make sure that your vehicle doors are always locked so somebody can't try to get in. Female or male, doesn't matter. You've got a situation on your hands once they try.
Yeah, I've also heard that you don't roll your window all the way down. Just enough. I was
just going to say, you only roll it down a crack to be able to, so that she can hear you, you can hear her. But that's a situation where, but understand what you've just done from a defensive tactic standpoint. And by the way, this would be my suggestion: if a hostile male is standing in front of your vehicle and they are keeping you from leaving, you're in a tough situation because you don't have the right, unless they pull a weapon, you don't have the right to just run somebody over. And if you keep inching toward them, of course, you're escalating the situation and bumping their knees, and now they become hostile. You've escalated to hostile.
Right.
But you have to be smart, and you have to be a little bit more cunning than the person in front of your vehicle. And one of the ways to do that is to motion to them over to your driver's side window. Now, if door is locked, window is all the way rolled up. But if somebody's in your vehicle, your goal is to get them from out in front of your vehicle so that you can speed off.
Gotcha.
So you motion them over as if you have information to tell them. They move from around your vehicle over to your driver's side, and then you speed off. Don't sit and talk. If somebody has, you have to trust people and take them at their face value. And if they have shown that they are willing to be hostile, don't roll down your window for them.
Okay. All right. Good advice, man. Do you remember, Blaine, it's been a couple years ago now, they posted it on Facebook, and there was a situation where one appraiser, I think it was that he and his wife, and they both may have been appraisers. Maybe she was the appraiser, he wasn't. I don't know. But I think it was a husband and wife team. They were out taking photos, and somebody got in their vehicle, a truck, if I remember correctly, and chased them for miles, and finally got in front of them, turned sideways in the road. In other words, they had chased them down. Any advice for a situation like that? Luckily, it didn't turn deadly, and it didn't. Nobody got injured, but somebody was pretty pissed off that this appraiser was taking pictures of their house enough so that they got in their own vehicle and chased this couple.
Yeah, I've had this scenario. I've dealt with this scenario many times, not as an appraiser, but working with law enforcement. And what happens is people tend to lose their minds once the adrenaline dump takes place, and they don't think logically. And so, of course, that's where high-speed chases come in. People drive excessively. They run red lights because their focus narrows. Their ocular abilities, their ability to see narrows. And so they miss stop signs, they miss stop lights, and they end up killing somebody. So the most important thing to do when you're being chased, meaning somebody's driving erratically behind you, it's this person, is to head straight for the nearest police station or depot, whether it's a sheriff depot somewhere or a bigger station. What happens a lot of times is people think, well, I'll just go into this neighborhood and then I'll pull into a driveway. Well, you've just trapped yourself. Yep. Or I'll pull into the Walmart parking lot and then we'll deal with it then. No, get to the nearest, just keep driving to the nearest police station.
Good point. Yeah, this is great advice. These are situations that, in general, we don't find ourselves in too often, but we could. And I think part of this, and you pointed this out right at the front, Blaine, is awareness. Just being aware and making sure a situation doesn't become a situation up front. Once it becomes a situation, it's a situation. Any other advice that you would give before we sign off here, Blaine? Anything we didn't cover that you think is important for appraisers to remember?
No, just, so they can get some value from it, just maybe beyond just these self-defense scenarios. Because again, just sheer numbers, there's 330 million people in the United States and only 10 million calls to police. Just by sheer math, most people are never going to encounter some type of situation, but it doesn't mean your awareness should be let down. And what I always try to teach people is that the awareness you go into every single day with, every single meeting with, and every single, say, appraiser, inspection, or observation with, can be then carried over into your daily lives. It gives you more awareness for subtle clues from your kids or from your spouse or significant other, from business opportunities and scenarios. So this is not just the narrow field of self-defense and defensive tactics, which most of us luckily and hopefully will never have to use. It's about developing your intuition that will keep you safe because you see those pre-incident indicators and you're aware, but it will also open up opportunities for you.
Be safe out there, appraisers. Blaine Feyen, where can we find more of your great advice?
RealValueGroup.com is just my company website, and of course, Real Value Cast is the podcast.
Perfect. And appraisers, if you're not already subscribed to the Real Value Podcast, you need to be. Excellent information. Blaine, thanks again for being on the program. Sure appreciate it.
Thank you a lot for having me. Really appreciate you having me on.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
Well, there he is.
Hey, Dustin.
How you doing, buddy?
Good, you?
I'm great, man. Doing good.
How's the sound?
Oh, it's excellent. Yeah, it's nice to have somebody on the program that has decent equipment.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so do I.
I feel like maybe my audio is blown out. Is it blown out on your end?
Not at all. No.
Okay. Good.
No. And I can control it here if I need to, so it's fine. What about mine on your side?
Yeah,
Can you hear me okay?
You sound great.